Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, a welcome from our founder. This is Jeremy Bentham, whose embalmed body is just up the road for everyone to see. His head has got rather rotten, so the head you see here is brought out on special occasions, which allows me to imagine what they're saying. Would I tell a lie? That's the plaster of Paris head. His real head says probably. And that's the kind of relationship that I have with the Department of Health over the issue of breast cancer screening. This is the miracle of San Carlo Borromeo, a mid-17th century painting by Giovanni Crespini, and it refers to the miraculous healing of a breast cancer. This is mid-17th century, and you can see the terror on this woman's face. So the diagnosis or the suspicion of breast cancer generates terror in the heart of a woman. My family has experienced this terror. This is me as a little boy, and that is my beloved mother Mary, who died tragically young and in uncontrolled pain, and her experience left me with anger. This disease is upfront and personal. And then about 15 years ago, my baby sister Linda, who was then in her early 50s, she developed breast cancer. But things had moved on again a lot since then, and thank God she's alive and well 15 years later. But it's in the family. I've got 2 daughters, and my sister has 4 daughters. Sorry about that. Women invited to screening receive these leaflets. Breast Cancer, the Facts. The object of my talk to you today is to say this should be retitled Breast Cancer, the Fibs. And it's not just me, some maverick saying this stuff. There was a lead article in the British Medical Journal in February last year, Breast Screening, What the Leaflets Don't Tell You. I'm not alone. And over the last year or two, the evidence has got worse. The Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine, at the beginning of this year, has breast screening saved lives? A question mark. The BMJ then published a review on the experience in Denmark, demonstrating breast cancer did not save lives. Last month, there was a major article and an editorial in the New England Journal of Medicine, the most prestigious medical journal, with the title, Screening Mammography, a Long Run for a Short Slide. And then also recently, the British Medical Journal commissioned Professor Klim McPherson to independently review the data, and he concluded the same as the New England Journal of Medicine, and Fiona Godley, in her editorial, supported the fact that this subject seriously needs attention from the Department of Health. I want to highlight a table from the New England Journal of Medicine editorial. Now, read this carefully. Estimated benefits and harms associated with 10 years of screening for 2,500 women aged 50 or more. You avoid 1 woman dying from breast cancer for every 2,500 screened for 10 years. That is the benefit. Against that, 1,000 women will have at least 1 false alarm and will undergo an unnecessary biopsy, and breast cancer will be overdiagnosed in 5 to 15 women who will then be treated unnecessarily for a disease that would never threaten her life. How can you understand this? This is so counter to the culture you've been brought up in. Catch it early, save your life. My answer to the question, has breast cancer saved lives, is a categorical no. Let us go back to the underlying hypothetical model which drives the screening industry. You start off with a lesion which we call duct carcinoma in situ, which is assumed to be a precursor lesion for breast cancer. Then that progresses to an early breast cancer, which progresses to a late breast cancer. It's a very simple, simplistic, linear dynamic. So screening theory would have you believe, catch it early, save a life, and save a breast. This is based on the premise that detection of early, by that I mean small cancers, leads to a fall in the incidence of late cancers. The detection of in situ disease will prevent the development of invasive disease. Smaller cancers, fewer mastectomies, fewer advanced cases, lower mortality. None of that is true. It is the assumption, yet the scientific data refutes that very seductive hypothesis. To understand this, you need to understand the biases associated with screening. There are 3 biases: lead time bias, where you are simply prolonging the period of observation; length bias, where you are simply picking up good cancers and the bad cancers slip through; and attendance bias, which is a social class effect. Let me explain that. Here we have a time frame from clinical detection of breast cancer to either death, or from cancer or death from old age. If you increase the time frame to the left and pick the disease up at screening, then survival is prolonged, even though the long-term outcome is the same. And that's called lead time bias. Length bias is illustrated by this cartoon. We trawl the sea for cancers, but we trawl the sea at intervals. At the moment it's 3-year intervals. We catch the slow swimming fish in these intervals. But the really nasty fish, the sharks that are going to kill you, slip through the net. And those are called interval cancers. And even if you shorten the interval to a year instead of 3 years, you get the same. Attendance bias means attenders who accept the invitation are different to those who fail to accept the invitation. Non-attenders, we know, are lower social class, and we know stage for stage, lower social class women do worse with the outcome of breast cancer for reasons we're not quite sure, and it's nothing to do with access to treatment. We don't yet understand that. Because of these biases, the only way to assess whether screening saves lives is randomized controlled trials comparing a screened population with an unscreened population, where the primary outcome is cause-specific mortality, not survival. You count the number of women dying of breast cancer in the screened against the unscreened, but at the same time it is just possible that all this activity might be detrimental for other causes of death, and therefore a secondary endpoint is all-cause mortality. The National Health Service screening program was established in 1998 following the Forrest report. This is Sir Patrick Forrest, who was a good friend of mine, and I respected him enormously. And it was predicated on the outcome of 7 randomized controlled trials, which started in the early 70s and were reported in the mid-80s. That's a very important thing to note. And the outcome of a summation of those trials was a relative risk reduction of breast cancer mortality of 25%, which is another way of saying a hazard ratio of 0.75. I don't expect any of you to understand that unless there are a few statisticians in the audience. But that 25% is what the women get. None of them can really understand it because it's framing of a result, which I will explain shortly. I was given the task of setting up the first national screening centre in the UK when I was Professor of Surgery at King's, and I chose Camberwell Green, and we set up this clinic. We were given a year from the Forrest report to get up and running and start training everybody to do screening in 1998. I know about screening. I started it in the southeast of England. Within 8 to 10 years, it all went pear-shaped. There were 2 sets of reports that looked at the more mature follow-up of these clinical trials and also looked at the probity of these clinical trials. And reports started to come out in all the top journals demonstrating the initial estimate of a 25% relative risk reduction was a gross overestimate. So the NHS screening program was predicated on 25%. The United States Preventive Services Task Force, both in 2002 and again in 2009, said it's not, it's 15%. And the Coercion report, Coercion is an independent group based in Denmark who take on subjects for overview analysis, and they derive the same percentage. So screening is associated with a 15% relative risk reduction, but these are the old trials that were started in the mid-70s and reported in the mid-80s, since when treatment has improved. Here is one illustration of how treatment has improved. At the time these trials were being conducted, the 5-year survival for breast cancer in the over 50s was about 70%. In 1984-85, we had the first overview of trials of adjuvant tamoxifen, and immediately the 5-year survival shot up to 85%. And now with newer drugs, and I won't bother you with the details, we now expect a 90% 5-year survival compared with the 70% 5-year survival at the time the trials were being done. So in other words, the window for improvement from screening gets narrower and narrower. Now this is a tough table, but it's to give you an idea how we translate these relative risk reductions into absolute numbers. Don't be embarrassed if you can't follow it. Trust me, or turn to a neighbor who happens to be a mathematician. So we take 10,000 women, age 50, and we screen them for 10 years. The incidence of breast cancer in this age group of women is 2 per 1,000 per year. So this group of women will generate 200 breast cancers. With modern treatment, over 10 years, this is a median follow-up of 5 years. So at a median follow-up of 5 years for this group of women, with modern treatment, you would expect 20 deaths. The relative risk reduction is of the number 20. So a 25% reduction of the number 20 means the absolute benefit is 5. 5 breast cancer deaths avoided over 10 years when you screen 10,000 women. But if the figure is nearer to 15%, it is 3 breast cancer deaths avoided by screening 10,000 women for 10 years. This leads to the issue of the framing of the result, where we now describe numbers needed to screen to save one life. If we take the initial NHS estimates, it works out at 1,000 women for 10 years to avoid 1 breast cancer death. If we take the more recent estimates, based on the same trial data, you have to screen close on 1,500 women for 10 years to avoid 1 breast cancer death. But if you take the modern era, and this is what the New England Journal of Medicine referred to, where treatments are so much better, then you have to screen about 3,000 women, 2,500 to 3,000 women for 10 years to avoid 1 breast cancer death. And that's called framing the result. How can you expect women invited for screening, being told that that is the case, to understand how disingenuous that invitation is? Muir Gray was the director of the National Screening Program, an honorable man, and he wrote, "All screening programs do harm. Some can do well, do good as well, as an afterthought, and that is the issue. The downside of screening are false alarms, overdiagnosis, unnecessary surgery, and increase in mastectomy rates, not decrease." I want to say a little bit about overdiagnosis. Here is a histopathological picture of duct carcinoma in situ. And it is assumed that it will inevitably progress to invasive breast cancer if you don't adequately treat it. Well, that is simply not true. And the estimates from the Coercion report are that for every breast cancer death avoided, 10 women are overdiagnosed and overtreated for something labeled breast cancer, which does not behave like breast cancer. Shock, horror. Because I dare say that in public, people use ad hominem attacks. He must hate women. He's a misogynist. He murders women. And yet, the same is exactly similar for prostate screening trials. Again, in the New England Journal of Medicine last year, the outcome of the prostate screening trials that for every prostate cancer death avoided by PSA screening, 50 men are overdiagnosed and overtreated. Everyone accepts that. I don't know why. There's a double standard here. They accept that men are overdiagnosed by screening, but they are resistant to the notion that women are overdiagnosed as a result of screening. In the year 2000, Michael Dweck, a surgical colleague of mine, and myself, we looked at the cancer registries and plotted the incidence of duct carcinoma in situ since the introduction of screening in the London area. The blues and the yellows are the group not screened. This is the group that are screened. This is the increased incidence in duct carcinoma in situ from less than 500 a year to nearly 2,000 cases a year in the London district. What we assume, based on screening theory, the knock-on effect of that would be that invasive cancer would start falling. Well, this is what we saw for invasive cancer, the unscreened blocks, the screened blocks. And it wasn't the case. The incidence of invasive cancer also goes up. So in situ cancer and invasive cancer go up in parallel when you start screening a population. And that is overdiagnosis. And it's not just us, mavericks. This was a separate analysis by Jurgensen published in the British Medical Journal, This shows the incidence of breast cancer in those too old to be screened and the green too young to be screened. And this group in the middle, this was the incidence of breast cancer before screening. And this is invasive breast cancer, note. It shoots up to the same incidence as the elderly women and remains up once you introduce screening. And that's when they introduce screening for the 50 plus. And then if you follow that down the road another 10 years, and here we look at the older age group who have been invited for screening, the same thing happens. And this is repeated in every country in the world. The introduction of screening increases the incidence of breast cancer by close on 50% increase. And 20% of those are in situ cancer. This is what we discovered looking at mastectomy rates. Mastectomy rates shot up since screening started. This is for duct carcinoma in situ. And that was 10 years ago, those results. Michael Dixon in breast cancer research last year has looked at the last 10 years, again showing the incidence of in situ cancer shooting up and the incidence of mastectomy shooting up. In every country in the world that introduces screening, mastectomy rates go up. Here is a summary slide of what I've said. And note, it was published 5 years ago by Barrett in the BMJ 2005. Working up from the bottom, this is breast cancer deaths, cause-specific deaths in the screened and in the unscreened. This is breast cancer incidence in the unscreened. This is breast cancer incidence in the screened. And these two lines that are superimposed are total mortality. And again, in all the slides, in all the trials, or the summation of all the trials, there is no effect on all-cause mortality. And yet the women are coerced to attempt for screening without informed consent, even to the point that they coerce women with learning difficulties. I find this disgusting. It's meant to be a cartoon of a woman with Down syndrome. And when you open the page, you'll see a cartoon strip trying to persuade this woman to come for screening. And the irony here is that women with Down syndrome almost never get breast cancer. And then you come back to breast screening, the facts. And this is the leaflet my wife got 2 or 3 weeks ago. Breast cancer, the spin. Look at this. Around half the cancers that are found at screening are still small enough to be removed from the breast. This means the whole breast does not have to be removed. Hooray! Only 50% mastectomy rate. And yet, for clinical breast cancer found in the normal way, it's only 25% mastectomy rate. You have twice the risk of having a mastectomy if your cancer is screen detected. But we mustn't tell the little women. It might frighten them off. And then they come up with this figure. Breast screening saves 1,400 lives a year. I don't know where that number comes from, honestly. Hand on heart, again and again, myself and my colleagues, where and how do you derive that number? We get no answer to that question. As far as I'm concerned, it's a made-up number. On the basis of this, I resigned from the National Health Service Screening Committee just over 10 years ago, and I wrote a letter to the Lancet explaining to the medical establishment what I've explained to you. And what happened? Every doctor in the country got a glossy leaflet like this. This is a photograph of it, ridiculing me. And worst of all, this chart here. Let me magnify it. They published this table to demonstrate that breast cancer mortality was going up and up and up, and then screening kicked in and it fell down. That is scientific fraud. If I published that, I would be up before the General Medical Council. It is fraudulent. This is the truth. And this comes from CRUK, nothing to do with me. Breast cancer mortality reached a peak in all age groups in about 1987. 1986-87 was the time adjuvant systemic therapy was rolled out for all women, tamoxifen, chemotherapy, which has had an effect on mortality of 30 or 40% reduction. But note, this fall in mortality is in all age groups, not just the age group being screened. So any fall in mortality we're seeing is due to improved treatment, not due to screening. I am not suggesting we shut down screening. First of all, it would be political suicide for any government to do that. But I have been invited, I was invited last year to speak to the Science and Technology Committee at the House of Commons to explain what I would do about this. And I had a very warm reception. And what I recommend is that instead of blanket screening for the whole female population, we should have a risk assessment, risk management campaign rather than one size fits all. This is just a picture of one of the modern algorithms, how we can accurately predict risk of developing breast cancer, both from family history and demography and so on. And as a result of that, it is possible to carry out a triage. If we look at the low-risk group, these women have something like 50 times the risk of dying of cardiovascular disease than breast cancer. Why are we obsessed by one issue? Perhaps this group could be advised on how to avoid cardiovascular disease, stop smoking, healthy diet, avoid alcohol, which incidentally might reduce the risk of breast cancer. This group at the top end, they need genetic counseling and genetic testing. Maybe if we just screened the middle risk group, we might have more bangs for the buck. I'm talking about buck, we're talking 70 million pounds a year on this scheme. Who knows? So maybe it would be rational to adopt a program like this rather than continue to coerce innocent women with half-truths to tick boxes and fulfill targets. If nothing else, you will agree with me, it is shameful and disgusting that women are denied the opportunity to learn the truth about screening. So my conclusion is, treat women like adults, offer informed choice rather than political spin, and I think the message might be getting through because I saw in the Evening Standard a couple of weeks ago the London Clinic is offering mammography at a reduced price. They can no longer sell it. Damaged goods. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Baum. That was thought-provoking and fantastic. Can we please start to have lots of questions? Okay. We have a microphone coming in, so if you could use the microphone, please.
You did say early on that detected early, the new treatments will have a greater chance of success.
I didn't say that.
Sorry?
I didn't say that. I'm sorry.
I thought you did.
No, I said that was the theory. Catch it early was the theory. My problem is that the catch it early mantra is something of a cliche. What people are saying is catch it small. And the way I teach my medical students on this is if you're a woman and you have a 1 centimeter cancer, would you rather it was 6 weeks old or 6 years old? And the answer is you'd rather it was 6 years old.
Right. What sort of, I don't know how to ask this now, what sort of detection should someone in my age group, 70 now, and
You don't
getting,
look 70, come
well,
on.
I am.
You
Thank you.
you don't look old enough to be screened even.
But I'm in an age group where it's theoretically increasing, even on your charts there. What should I do?
Right. That is a very sensible, excellent question, and I'm often asked that. And the answer is you don't do anything. And the reason you don't do anything, the results you're seeing, fantastic improvements with treatment, these are on women who by chance detect the breast cancer. Having detected it by chance, then they're aware they should go and have it attended to. But you don't live your life worrying about breast cancer. If you want to worry about the most likely cause of your death, worry about cardiovascular disease. Don't obsess about breast cancer. You're 5 times more likely to die of cardiovascular disease. I hope you don't smoke.
Michael, as you know, because we consulted you, my wife recently had breast cancer, and the biopsy showed that it wasn't DCIS, but invasive lobular. So, and 2 centimeters. And that's, despite the fact that I've signed a letter with you about the inaccuracy of the NHS information, which is undoubtedly the case, that did give me pause for thought, I must say. Would you like to comment?
Yes, that is often the killer question, because you don't want to be unkind when you answer it. Now, I don't have to be unkind in answering your question, because the message is good news. It's all good news. There are 2 possibilities. Left undetected, that might not have progressed, or it would not have progressed in the woman's lifetime, the woman's normal expectation of life. I left out a whole section on the natural history of breast cancer, where untreated many breast cancers, clinical breast cancers, don't do any harm. So that's one possibility. The other possibility, might even regress spontaneously, or the third possibility, we're talking about your wife now. I know. The other possibility, she may be that 1 in 2,500 women. So whichever way you look at it, it's good news.
Dan, I think there were 2 people with their hands up here. Okay. Here? Right.
Late in your presentation, you were talking about risk assessment triage, and your slide suggested that there was some software that did that.
Yes.
What's that software called, please?
Well, there are several versions of that software. That's the IBIS-2 software, which was developed in St. Bartholomew's department, Professor Jack Cusick's department. It's IBIS-2. There are others that are coming online all the time. We are working towards having an iPad technique where the patient, they're not patients, the clients, where the clients can fill in all the data on an iPad, which is instantaneous translated into a risk before coming in to see the doctor. So the technology exists. In fact, that technology for risk assessment, the iPad touchpad, I actually sat in a clinic at Massachusetts General recently, and they've already got that going, and I like to get that into London.
We have a gentleman here.
Okay. Suppose you had an extra hour of teaching available for medical students. Would you teach them about cancer, or would you teach them about numbers needed to treat?
That's a very easy question. What I've described to you is a generic issue, illustrated by breast cancer. It applies across the board. The first thing our medical students must learn is a degree of numeracy and an understanding of risk, and I wish they'd learn it in their first year. Is that the right answer, sir?
Yes, it is the correct answer.
Thank you.
We have a gentleman front here.
Yes, you've spoken always with reference to mortality rates, death rates. Would any of your conclusions be different if you were concerned about quality years lived?
Quality-adjusted life years. Well, I mean, that's an excellent question. Quality-adjusted life years you cannot apply in health economics unless you can demonstrate years of life are saved. Quality of life, though, is a real important issue. Now, some of these women, I've written a lot on the natural history of breast cancer, and I've collected a large series of clinically overt, untreated breast cancers. And they're pretty grotesque. What happens to them, even if they're not killing the woman, they're horrible, and they impair quality of life. So there is an argument for the local treatment in any case to maintain a good quality of life. But that isn't an issue with screening, because if you allow the minority of screen-detected lesions to progress to become clinically detectable, these days they are very easily treated. Local treatment now is a doddle. It's minimalistic, and it's getting more and more minimalistic as we go.
We have a lady in there.
Thank you. Given that the government is now even more committed to saving money where it can in the NHS, I wonder is it too optimistic to think that the logical proposal from what you've presented, which is that the government could save money by doing much less screening, use a fraction of that savings to set up the screening and prevention trials for the intermediate risk group, and put some of the rest of the savings into improving access to treatment and the new drugs?
Yes.
You know, I could imagine that might go down quite well, and no one would have to lose too much face about screening being, you know...
You're absolutely right, and I've been battling this one for a number of years. I don't want to embarrass the Department of Health, whichever government it is. I don't want to embarrass them or humiliate them, but they won't listen. I've been banging on about this for 10 years and suggesting alternative ways of spending. They simply will not listen. We had a letter in the Times. In fact, Hazel Thornton was the first author of that letter in the Times. Was it last week, Hazel? And a letter in the BMJ drawing attention to the fact that in February 2009, we publicly described in the Times and the BMJ that the leaflets were misleading, frankly disingenuous. Mike Richards, the cancer czar, responded 2 days later saying that they're already working on an update, a more honest report. We haven't seen it yet, so we published a letter in the Times last week saying, where is it? What's happened? Meanwhile, 3 million women have been invited, is that the right number? 3 million women have been invited to screen without informed consent. So I don't know what to do. I'm just hoping a public lecture like this, which may cause ripples and get out to a wider audience, may just embarrass the government into doing something.
Okay. We have time for one last question from the lady at the back. And just to reassure you, the lecture is being recorded and it does reach a very wide audience. So we thank you for this.
So I can kiss my Nigel goodbye.
Hi, I have a more fundamental question. I'm not very familiar with how is this breast screening. So how safe is it? Like if you say that the breast is a system, if you disturb it by radiating or something like that, you may actually produce cancer with over-screening?
Oh, you mean by the X-rays?
Yes.
Yeah. The dose of X-rays for mammographic screening is incredibly low, and less than a chest X-ray. And it used to be a concern in the early days of mammography. It isn't really a concern that mammographic screening will induce new breast cancers. But putting it another way, the commonest cause, quote unquote, of breast cancer is screening, because once you start screening, the incidence goes up by 50%. But that is, of course, it isn't causing directly the breast cancer, it's exposing latent disease. But I don't think you need to worry about the dose of radiation.
Okay, I think that we need to close because there's a class coming in here. Thank you all very much for coming. Remember to come back for next Tuesday. And this is fantastic. This is exactly what the lunchtime lectures are all about. Free debate on interesting and controversial subjects. Thank you. Bye.